So now to the last talk of the session. This is by Rose Holley. And the talk is on crowdsourcing-based curation and user engagement in digital library design. Rose has been working as a professional librarian in the UK, New Zealand and Australia for more than 30 years and is passionate about client-focused services. Since 2014, Rose has held the position of Spatial Collections and Digital Curator at the University of New South Wales in Canberra. Prior to this, she held senior positions at the National Archives of Australia. She was the Director of Software Implementation there and National Library of Australia and the University of Auckland. She has expertise in collection management and digitization projects, digital preservation and innovation. So unfortunately Rose could not be here, but we'll play her recorded talk.
The University of New South Wales, Australia. It is my great pleasure to talk to you today about crowdsourcing-based curation and user engagement in digital library design. It is nearly 10 years now since the first mass public crowdsourcing project was started in a library. This was the innovative text correction of historic Australian newspapers, which I managed for the National Library of Australia. It was a phenomenal and unexpected success, more initially by chance, novelty and experimentation than considered design. Back in 2007, very little was known about crowdsourcing and behaviours, and Wikipedia was still relatively new. The decision to implement public text correction and encourage our users to improve and add value to library content was initially driven by a desire to have a high-quality search rather than any wish for social engagement or online community building. The idea of enabling anyone to edit or curate library-owned content was controversial and indeed terrifying for some librarians, whilst the users mostly saw it as a logical and indeed very overdue step in their expectations of how they should be able to engage with content in a digital world. Over the last 10 years, I've undertaken research into the behaviours, motivations and needs of both the 50,000 online newspaper text corrector volunteers who participate in crowdsourcing and the libraries who offer crowdsourcing features on their content, to better understand what is happening and why. I have compared the activity of Australian newspapers to other significant and similar non-library services with large communities of online volunteers, such as Wikipedia and Zooniverse. I've also looked at what works and what doesn't on user interface design and how to be totally user-centric when designing these services. How can you work in partnership with your users and even encourage them to lead you, as we did in the first 3 years of Australian newspapers? In this presentation, I will share the knowledge I have gained on crowdsourcing, together with my recommendations. We will take an in-depth look at the Australian newspaper text correction aspect of Trove over the last 10 years, including key decision points in the crowdsourcing journey, management and encouragement of the online volunteers, and their achievements. Also, when we say, is it successful, what do we really mean? As our digitisation outputs increase through digitisation of millions more pages, our volunteers are faced with massive amounts of uncorrected text, and their phenomenal accomplishments are but a drop in this ocean. In the end, what is the cost versus the benefit of crowdsourcing and its future? How can we leverage crowdsourcing to our best advantage, applying what we have learned in the last 10 years? I also look to the future and question if someone were doing it all again, starting now, would they do it the same or differently for correction of newspapers? With artificial intelligence rapidly advancing and research ongoing in post-OCR text correction programs, now that significant corpuses of both machine-corrected and manual-corrected newspaper texts are available, is it likely that crowdsourcing will continue, or will it be replaced by implementation of smarter, intelligent software programs? This is the current interface of Trove. It has gone through some design changes in the last few years, but in essence is a little different to the original design. The backbone of Trove is the Union Library Catalogue of Australia, which has physical and digital holdings from over 2,000 libraries in Australia. Trove also harvests data resources from other institutions, such as archives, galleries and museums, and our national TV broadcaster, the ABC, making this a really useful Australian information portal. But what makes Trove really well used by millions of Australians is the main body of content, which is 211 million digitised Australian historic newspaper articles from 1,200 different newspapers from around Australia, dating from 1803 to 1955. The newspaper zone is also the area in which the majority of the user curation is occurring, and which has captured the interest of libraries internationally due to the public text correction activity. This slide shows the interface for Australian newspapers, which is a sub-interface within Trove. I have searched for an article on UNESCO New Delhi, and I'm now seeing the article in the newspaper viewer. You can see on the left-hand side the OCR text with user options, and on the right the image of the newspaper page. Both text size and image can be increased in size. A user can undertake a number of activities on the article by hovering their mouse over the icons on the left-hand side, including correction of text by clicking the Fix This Text button, adding comments, tags, adding the article to a list, sharing or downloading the article, and also ordering a high-resolution copy. I will not go into detail about this user interface because you can try it out for yourself. It is really easy to use. Image zooming and panning was based on an open-source library inspired by the Google Map Viewer, which was the idea of Kent Fitch of Project Computing, the reliable system architect and programmer we worked with. Our team was very small, consisting of only 6 people, with the key IT roles being external contractors. Right up front, we made 2 decisions. Firstly, to have the system live on the National Library website as we developed it, so we branded it Beta. And secondly, we wanted direct and active involvement from the users on its development. In fact, for the first 3 years, all development was actually led 100% by our users' feedback. What we did was to put a notice on our website, Testers Wanted. We expected perhaps 20 people to contact us, but after only a few days, we had to take the notice down because so many people had emailed us. We also did not expect the use to take off as quickly as it did. So we had thousands of live users at a very early stage. The way we engaged with users was to have a prominent link on every page saying, "Contact us with feedback." We did not specifically ask for feedback on functionality or design, but most of the feedback was actually around these 2 topics. If we had more than 10 users within a few days ask us for the same functionality or interface design, then we implemented the change immediately. For example, to change the size of the font or the ability to add a missing line. Most of the users were astounded by the fact that their requests were implemented and that we responded to them by email directly and immediately. And this seemed to engage them to a much higher level than we had expected. So at this point we had no software development plan, and we were making very many small incremental changes on a daily basis led by users. You have to remember that nothing like this had ever been done before, so we were feeling our way in the dark. Quite quickly the users' expectations shifted, and instead of asking things like, "Can I do this?" they said, "Where do I do this?" Users initially seemed to have their functionality and design expectations based on Google as the benchmark, and when we surpassed Google, they got really excited. We encouraged users not to place limits on their expectations, and they quickly started to ask us for all kinds of things. It was a very exciting time working on this, and we knew we were onto something really important. I still consider it a great honour that I was able to have so much freedom to run with innovative ideas, make decisions, and have such excellent customer-focused people on my team to create the Australian newspaper service, which eventually morphed into Trove as we know it today. We also engaged 2 young university students just out of university who had formed a web design company, Oxide Interactive, to undertake user case studies, prototyping, interface design and usability testing. There were 4 rounds of testing with 5 different users each time. Oxide basically just took a group of people off the streets in Canberra and sat them down in front of prototypes and then the site and asked them to do various things like search for a newspaper, correct the text, and then they modified the interface based on their feedback. At this time, there was a strong expectation from the librarians who were contributing newspapers to the service that the functionality and interface design should be decided by them rather than random people off the street or the real users, since they thought librarians would always know better. We strongly resisted this and continued using our real users to lead us in the development, which is why I think the interface was such a great success and remains largely unchanged today. People asked us why anybody would want to be involved in curating content when not being paid for it, and I have 2 answers to that question. Firstly, expectations of users have changed in the digital age. With online technologies, users can be easily enabled to help us gather, curate, create and add value to our resources, and they want to. Why shouldn't they? The gatekeeper role of the library has changed into that of an enabler, giving people freedom to do what they want, and our resources can have value added and be used in new ways. Secondly, I was greatly inspired by Clay Shirky's book, published in 2008, Here Comes Everybody. It explains his idea that everyone has some cognitive surplus. This is people's leisure time, most often spent watching TV, that could be harnessed and used instead on doing things that matter for the common good, that require a bit of brain work or creativity as well. The internet is the enabler for this activity, allowing anyone to build online communities that can come together to achieve amazing things. He says, as the internet radically reduces the costs of collective action for everyone, it will transform the relationship between ordinary individuals and the large hierarchical institutions. He also coined the well-known phrase, the internet runs on love. His idea of cognitive surplus certainly proved to be correct in 2008, with the involvement of millions of individuals in the creation of Wikipedia, the citizen science projects of Zooniverse and Galaxy Zoo, and Australian newspapers. In 2009, I undertook some research on our text correctors' behaviours and motivations, which I published in a report, Many Hands Make Light Work. You can see on this slide some of the main reasons why people wanted to be involved, the most cited reason being that it is pleasure and fun. Interestingly, what I found out about motivations correlated closely to a study carried out by Oded Nov in 2007 on the motivations of people contributing to Wikipedia. Again, the top reason given for editing and creating articles was fun. People also have a strong desire to help with something that is for the common good, in this case free knowledge, and in the case of the newspapers, improving the word searching, especially so that family names can be found. Over 50% of the corrections are done on names appearing in the births, deaths and marriages columns, and also the shipping news. It is important to understand motivations of people so that you can create something where people will want to join in. I have also researched ways that user motivation can be maintained or even increased. This slide shows the key things that increase motivation of users. These include recognising their achievements, developing camaraderie and team spirit with online communication mechanisms such as forums, giving them more work, guiding them in targeted projects or short-term goals. It is very important to remember that only a tiny percentage of all your users, usually the top 100, undertake the large majority of the work. Once these users have identified themselves, you need to pay close attention to any feedback they give you or functionality they ask for, since these people are the kingpins and are essential to the success of your service. In the next few slides, I will give you some examples of the functionality our top users asked us to implement. In our first beta version, we only had a list of the top 5 correctors. Very quickly, many users requested a complete ranking table because they wanted to know where they were in the overall big picture. Stakeholders thought we had started to make the text correcting deliberately competitive, but we had not. The rankings were entirely in response to our users asking for them. It is interesting to note here on this slide that there is a massive loyalty in our top 10 correctors, and you can see that 3 have been contributing since the first year of launch, which is now 9 years ago, and 3 since the second year of launch. All except the Frankston Library joint account have been helping at consistently high levels for at least 6 years now. The ranking table also shows the big pictures which our users wanted to know. 246 million lines in total have been corrected. The top users have corrected between 1.6 up to 4.6 million lines total. It will be very hard now for a new person to get into the top 10 ranking, since these people have got years behind them. There are about 50,000 registered correctors. The users wanted more than a ranking list, however. They next asked us to be able to see the profile and interests of the users in the ranking around them. Each user can see anyone else's activity, including tags, comments, text corrections, and lists they have curated. For users who have the tag cloud, it is clear to see their interests. In this example, the user is interested in shipwrecks, railway disasters, obituaries, family notices, and poetry. There is also more information and statistics on text correction in the profile. You can, for example, see how many lines per month this user has been doing, and that she now holds ranking number 5 in the Hall of Fame, with nearly 3 million lines corrected overall. This user, Anne Manley, is a champion for the service and is often out and about giving talks on the content of newspapers, search techniques and text correction. We are now looking at the profile of the same user on this slide, and you can see in detail all her comments and text corrections, both before and after she has made those changes. Having this high level of transparency was important to us and also to the users, since there was no moderation activity. Any changes a user makes go live immediately. They correct a word to the correct spelling, and it is immediately searchable. By doing it this way, it clearly shows the value of the activity to the user. It also assumes that the user can be trusted, and when a high level of trust is gifted, it is usually human nature to honour this. Our strategy strategy was to rely on the users to alert us if anything unexpected happened, which it never did in the 6 years I managed it. It would have been very difficult to moderate changes since there were thousands of users and the average activity of the top users is between 16 to 60,000 lines per month. We also did not have a massive team of staff behind this. This slide shows the same user in the Trove forum. Users can share as much information as they like about themselves and communicate with the project team or with each other. Initially, we did not build any communication mechanism into the service, and we emailed users directly when they contacted us. However, in the early days, before we understood how much the users wanted to talk to each other, we observed a very strange activity in the comments. Users were trying to connect with each other by leaving comments with their phone numbers and emails in articles that were heavily corrected by many users so that many people would see. We were really surprised by this and immediately set out about investigating how to implement a forum so that the virtual community as a whole could not only see each other but also form sub-interest groups and build online camaraderie. Subgroups that developed were, for example, the people using knitting patterns, of which there were many, railway history enthusiasts, and local history groups. There were university researchers. One was doing climate change and one was doing influenza, and they galvanised groups of people to help them find and correct articles relevant to their research topics. I added this slide to show the 3 main types of user discussion that went on in the forum. Firstly, functionality, how to do things, and testing for errors. Secondly, enhancement requests. And thirdly, queries on which newspaper titles would be digitised. So to summarise, the key good decision points that we made in our crowdsourcing journey were: login is not required. Make it as easy as possible for people to try out without any commitment or unnecessary barriers. As you have seen, many users did then decide later to register because otherwise they could not get into the ranking tables or see their own history of activity, but this was through choice. No moderation or vetting of activity. We placed a high level of trust in the users, which they responded positively to. We relied on the user community to let us know if anything was wrong. However, the original version of the text remains searchable if a user were to vandalise or delete it, and vandalism would be easy to reverse with rollback to before and after dates of changes. Thirdly, all curation, including corrections, tags and comments, are immediately live within milliseconds and can be searched on. This really impressed the users. It helped them understand the big picture, why they were doing it, and immediately improved the service for them. Lastly, a high level of transparency. Everyone can see all the text changes to an article from the start, who has done them and when. The whole history is retained and made viewable. This also enabled rollback if required if anything went wrong, but it never did. From my research into other crowdsourcing projects, there are also another 4 things that ideally could be done to motivate and encourage users, which other sites have used successfully. These include having different options for users to work on your tasks. For example, for those not doing their own topics, they generally prefer to be given work. We were asked lots of times by our text correctors if we could define groups of articles for them to work on instead of having to search for their own. It is also important to have progress against the main goal clearly visible to motivate users on the front interface if possible. Users also like to be kept informed about how their work fits into the big picture, both in statistical format and through things like exciting discoveries and new research that has been enabled. Lastly, we have many people ask us for small tokens that would make users proud of their work and identifiable to others, mainly in the form of I Love Newspaper Text Correction t-shirts and label pins. It is important to remember that no matter how good your functionality and interface is, the main goal of your crowdsourcing activity and the subject content are critical to the success. The goal has to be for the common good, to benefit as many people as possible, and the content has to be really interesting to a wide audience. Boring or niche topics will never attract a large body of people, or those which require a high level of prior knowledge. Of all the crowdsourcing projects I have researched in the last 8 years, the one that galvanised a nation even more so than Australian newspapers is the UK parliamentary expenses scandal in 2009, otherwise referred to as the Dockhouse scandal. This was a major political scandal concerning expenses that MPs had claimed, which included everything from the luxury dockhouse pictured on this slide to prostitutes and second homes. It is a perfect example of topics that make a project interesting. It covered power, politics, people, money and sex. It appealed to a wide audience and was for the common good. In a matter of days after the original documents were released under a Freedom of Information Act, every single expenses claim from every MP, which was about 400,000 barely legible handwritten pages, had been transcribed, tagged and flagged of importance by the public in record time in a crowdsourcing interface created by the Guardian newspaper. The opening and identification of the information resulted in resignations, sackings, prosecutions and imprisonments for members of the House of Commons and Lords. This table gives a summary of my top tips for crowdsourcing. More information can be found in my published paper, Crowdsourcing, How and Why Should Libraries Do It?, with some examples of user interface designs that I haven't had a chance or time to go in today. A measure of the success of your site is when it changes from being really fun to being totally addictive. Both the Australian newspapers and the wonderful Galaxy Zoo, Zooniverse, Citizen Science projects have been described by many users as totally addictive, and both have retained a core group of loyal users for many years who are spending much longer time per session and many more hours per week than you would expect. On both of these projects, some users are working as if it is their full-time job and doing about 50 hours per week. Addiction comes, I think, when you have the perfect combination of interesting content, a really good main goal, and all the functionality and interface design points we have discussed today that have been developed based on user feedback and involvement. That is, your service 100% meets the needs and expectations of your users. So, what is the likely cost benefit in the volunteer curation activities? In April 2008, writer Clay Shirky and computer scientist Martin Wattenberg estimated the total time volunteer editors had spent creating Wikipedia at that point was roughly 100 million hours. In 2013, the National Library of Australia estimated that if staff had been employed to do text correction, it would have cost in the vicinity of $12 million. This month, October 2017, I did my own calculation. The cost benefit of text correctors in Trove was in excess of $44 million. I calculated this by working out that in a single hour, an average person can correct 95 lines, although the top text correctors are doing about double this amount. The 246 million total corrected lines from the last 9 years therefore equate to 2.5 million hours work. At the Australian minimum wage of $17.70 per hour, this equals $44 million. And this figure does not include the overheads or office space to house approximately 8,000 workers each month. But what does success really mean? In the case of Australian newspapers, the goal was to improve the quality of the search by increasing the overall accuracy of the whole corpus. Arguably, this has not been significantly achieved, as we will see shortly. However, what has occurred, the creation of an active, vibrant community that has become socially engaged across many physical and virtual communities, was a runaway success, even though very little thought had been given to this at the start, and it was not even an articulated goal of the project. Let's now look at this graph. The red line shows the increasing amount of newspaper articles being added to Trove over the last 9 years, measured by lines of text. By May 2017 this year, there were 15 billion lines of newspaper text, which equates to 208 million articles. Based on research data, I believe that perhaps half to 2/3 of the articles have lines that need correcting, which is approximately 8 billion lines. The blue line at the bottom shows the actual lines corrected by volunteers so far, which is 231 million. When we started this presentation, that seemed a lot. But now that we compare it to the goal and see it visually on this graph, it is but a drop in the ocean, and it doesn't seem very much at all. What this means is that the corpus has not been significantly improved in quality after all, which was the single aim of the crowdsourcing. This is the first time that I have clearly understood this big picture myself and properly analysed this data. Don't get me wrong, the quality of the newspapers is not terrible. It's still above 90% OCR accuracy. It is just that we wanted it to be perfect, and it seems so hard to achieve this last little step of perfection. So if we are going to want to continue striving for perfection, what are our options now to do this? Can we encourage more volunteers to join us, or use our existing users to do more corrections? Let's examine more closely the activity of our text correctors. We have 2 charts here. The top shows the average numbers of users actively making corrections each month, and the bottom shows the amount of lines corrected per month. You can see that during the first few years of the project, the number of users and corrections was rising exponentially. When I was doing my first research on crowdsourcing in 2009, there was a direct correlation between the amount of new content being added and the increasing activity of all of users. However, you can see that in the last few years, despite more new content being added, the activity is levelling out. It is currently remaining fairly consistent in that there are about 8,000 registered users active per month, correcting a total of 3 million lines per month. We know from our ranking tables that the top users are correcting much more than anyone else, which is up to 60,000 lines per month. Research on other similar services, including Wikipedia and Zooniverse, show a similar pattern developing. It appears that at a certain point in time, the cognitive surplus saturation point, as I would call it, is reached. In Wikipedia, the saturation point is 8% of registered users are active each month. It was originally thought that this would be because most of the encyclopedia is now written. However, since the Australian newspapers is also showing the same pattern, with a saturation point slightly higher at 16% of registered users, even when there is more content than ever before to correct, there may actually be something else happening. It is interesting to note that many of the volunteers who want to help with the common good goals are actually involved in more than one crowdsourcing project, and they divide or ration their time equally between several worthy causes. I think further research on some of the established long-term and large crowdsourcing projects is needed to get a better understanding of what is actually happening here. I'm now nearing the end of this presentation, and so I want to address the question which was asked to me by the National Digital Library of India. If you were starting over again from scratch, would you do anything differently now based on what you've learned in the last 10 years, and also because of advances in technology? My answer is yes. However, there's only one thing that I would do differently. Over the last 10 years, we've seen great advances in artificial intelligence, that is, using computers to do things that previously could only be achieved by human intelligence using the mind, eye, or hand. For example, advances in facial recognition software, which enables Facebook to now recognise and tag you in other people's photos, whether you like it or not. Combined with these advances in intelligent software is the fact that we now have massive corpuses of newspaper text that are being corrected both by automated OCR software and manually by the human hand. We did not have the sample data like this when we started back in 2007. Software can be trained by looking for patterns and repeating these patterns millions of times. Neural networks allow massive processing capability in a timely way. Hardware to support this is becoming cheaper every day. I want to introduce you to a new concept, that is, to use artificial intelligence-based software to improve the accuracy of text, which has been trained using a giant newspaper corpus of manual corrections. This software would be applied after standard OCR correction has taken place and before manual crowdsourcing activity. It should significantly improve the accuracy of text and therefore searching. Software research and development in this field has been ongoing for the last 7 years, most notably from contributors to the European-funded Impact Group, and also from Project Computing in Australia, which is the company Ken Fitch, the systems architect of Australian newspapers and Trove, works for. I will now talk about Overproof, which is a product on the market that I would use if I was doing the same project again with English language newspapers. Overproof has been trained using many of the manual corrections applied to Australian newspapers and uses multiple OCR error models and models of the English language. It is noted that even the manual corpus still contains errors. The manually corrected corpus is referred to as the gold or the ground truth. The software runs through a training sequence where it checks against the entire ground truth, for example 100 million lines, several times, for example 100 times, before it is ready for business. The difference about Overproof is that it is correcting and measuring at word level rather than character level, because the artificial intelligence enables better understanding of words and their context. Tests show that when applying Overproof on the Australian newspapers, the word accuracy is raised from about 80% to 94%, which is significant. Note, this accuracy level is not related to OCR character accuracy, and also that word accuracy probably cannot be raised above 96%, since some of the original print is always unreadable or missing. If you go to the Overproof website, you can read a lot more about the development, testing sample and training sets. Also on the site is a demo. I have pasted a sample of poor quality article text I found in Australian newspapers that have many errors into the box, and then I click the correct button. You can see on the right the original poor quality of the article on rabbit text. After hitting correct, instantly the text is corrected and the words changed are highlighted. You can see the obvious improvement. This is quite a radical breakthrough for us. Obviously, you would not manually use a software like this, but run it across the corpus as an automated process. This software is available now. If you are starting from scratch, then obviously it would be logical to use this software or similar, and you would apply it after OCR correction and prior to crowdsourcing. Well, that concludes my presentation on crowdsourcing-based curation and user engagement in digital library design. I hope you have found this information interesting and relevant to your own project, and that you are now able to apply some of the things you have learned here in Australia. I wish you all the best for the UNESCO National Digital Library of India project. Thank you.